Thank you, everybody, for taking time this afternoon to come and listen to me talk about something that's very interesting to me. Thank you also to the Duke-NUS team for putting this wonderful event together. All very much appreciated. So there may be some of you sitting in the audience that hearing that introduction thinking, so this guy is a chemist and he's a lawyer. Why is he up here talking to me about artificial intelligence? That doesn't make any sense at all. So John actually hit on one point in that I spent years in a radiology department, and it was right around the inception of teleradiography and films disappearing for x-rays, everything becoming electronic. So I've maintained an interest in that, in imaging and imaging modalities over the years, and have followed fairly carefully what's been going on in the artificial intelligence applications in radiology. On the chemistry side, I picked up an article about 2 years ago on the use of AI in drug development. And I thought, well, this is, what are these people talking about? How do you use AI in drug development? So I was bitten in that regard as well. I'm not going to hold myself out as a computer scientist who's going to sit down and help you design a neural network, nor am I an electronic engineer, so I can't figure out how to put things together. But with those deficiencies recognized by everybody, we'll go ahead and talk about this today. Just a quick introduction of our firm. Morgan Lewis is about 3,000 attorneys, over 30 offices worldwide. And my role as the co-leader of the Global Life Sciences Group, I work with, come into contact with my partners who are corporate partners, partners who are regulatory partners, litigation partners, and we all work together as one firm with our clients to solve the problems that they may be having that would benefit from bringing those varied tools together in a unified, holistic approach. Okay. Enough of the spiel there, and let's get down to the nuts and bolts. So let's start out just thinking in terms of terms. You often hear when you mention artificial intelligence to people that they think that that's a dirty word. It's like, oh, don't call what I'm doing artificial intelligence. It's terrible. Why is that? This is a quote from Wired magazine. So, despite enormous excitement when the field of artificial intelligence was established in the 1950s, it's repeatedly given itself a bad name. There have been great expectations, and it's failed. The balloon has collapsed on it. This common AI had become a digital dirty word. You'll hear that. You'll see that in articles. Let's just look, what do we mean when we talk about artificial intelligence? For those of you who think artificial intelligence is a dirty word, we can also use augmented intelligence, or we can use intelligent technology. Those seem to have a fairly wide acceptance as terms. So its official birth was at a famous Dartmouth College conference in 1956. And about 14 years later, there were a number of biomedical systems that were developed, Internist, Casnet, and Mycin, which were of very moderate success. Nothing went further than that. 1973, Sir James Lighthill officially described in a report to the British government the AI field was a total failure, which effectively ended all UK funding for artificial intelligence and ushered in what's become known as the AI winter. Fast forward to the 1990s, interest is being slowly regained, largely due to the design and promulgation of AI-based expert systems, which were quickly developed worldwide. First system, XCon, was a stunning success. 1997, Deep Blue, IBM's supercomputer of the time, defeated Garry Kasparov in chess. About 5 years ago, there was a lot of fanfare. Google had taught DeepMind how to perform the all-important task for YouTube of recognizing cat videos. Where would we be without that? So for those of you who are cat fanciers, I apologize. This looks like something I might have drawn, but this is what Google thinks a cat looks like. This is my ham-fisted way of apologizing to cat fanciers. I found this while I was looking for the picture of the Google cat, and I thought it was so ridiculous, I just had to share it. So I hope the cat fanciers in the audience have forgiven me now. March 2016, AlphaGo beat the then reigning Go champion. An incredibly complex task. If you read the story about this, about the number of possible permutations on a Go board, it was very surprising that a machine was able to do this. The field continues to enjoy robust growth, and I think an indication of that is you look at the number of AI patents that have been issued by the USPTO, so the lower blue line, and the number that have been filed, the upper green line. And what we see is an inflection point at 2014. 2014 is right around the time when graphic processing units, which most of us are more familiar with probably from games, became truly powerful and more widely available for people to fiddle about with. So how do we think about this architecturally? Artificial intelligence we can think of as kind of the broad perimeter, and it refers to a machine that's capable of learning. Encompassed within that is machine learning, and machine learning refers to a machine that is teachable. So you give it a data set, and it learns from that data set. The same way we learn things. It goes in, it makes mistakes, it comes back out from those mistakes, tries again in a different permutation, different parameters. Deep learning uses complex neural networks similar to machine learning. This is different than for, let's say, diagnostics, computer-aided diagnostics, in that typically you'd be looking for one disease or one condition. So you're looking for a fracture of an arm bone, let's say, in computer-aided diagnostics. The neural networks provide the potential to look at multiple disease states simultaneously, as well as to collate and work with data from treatment regimens and disease monitoring, and bring that all together in somewhat of a customizable experience for the patient. What do I mean when I say neural networks? Very simplified outline. So an input layer, this may be a radiologic scan. It goes into a hidden layer where an operation is performed on the data, and that operation may be as simple, let's say you're looking at cancer, or you're looking for cancer. Is this tissue normal tissue? Yes, no. If it's yes, maybe you go to the output layer. If it's no, it goes to the second hidden layer, and there's more data applied. There are different functions applied to it until you eventually get to the output layer. Think again of the horrible picture of the cat from Google. So that's the sort of process that has gone through. Again, the development of the field, I think, is obvious from what's going on in the relevant industries and fields. So in 2015, IBM acquired Merge Healthcare, which is a radiology software provider. Merge, and I just think this is a fascinating fact, but they have 30 billion patient images. Think about what a trove of data that is for developing just an incredibly robust radiological image analytical platform. They also have an account list of 7,500 hospitals in which data is being fed back and forth between Merge, now IBM, and those hospitals. So that data set continues to grow and become further integrated. So IBM is going to use that huge data set to train its Watson deep learning system to recognize diseases, not just cancer, but they're going to work this deep learning, these neural networks on chest scans and mammograms with the promise of being able to detect cancer and other pathological tissues at much earlier stages and much smaller sizes. So IBM's testing Watson at the Cleveland Clinic and at New York's Memorial Sloan Kettering. Well, let's look at the state of play of digital health and AI. First, we'll take a look at the taxonomy of the digital health AI ecosystem. I think the important thing, the overlay that I want to give you of this, is probably a minimal use for me to just stand up here and read this, is that look at each of these categories and you see the opportunity for data to be gathered and to be fed back into this growing data pool about patients, diseases, conditions, and also look at how patient-driven each of these categories either is now or has the potential to become. So with respect to patient engagement, we're looking at solutions that equip healthcare providers to connect with the patients in non-traditional manners. So it's not just about going into the office and seeing the doctor. Care coordination. Care right now is, I would say, in a lot of respects, woefully fragmented. If you can get all of a person's care providers, particularly a person with a chronic illness such as diabetes or a cardiac illness, if you can get all of the patient's care providers communicating with each other through some sort of an electronic data sharing mechanism, then you have a much better chance of a good outcome for the patient at a much more economically reasonable touch point. Interoperability, you want the different diagnostic modalities, machines communicating with each other. Data capture and analytics can come from many sources. It can come from the analytical instruments. It can come from sensors and wearables. And finally, telemedicine, particularly in countries that have any sort of a significant rural population, it's very difficult for people, again, particularly with chronic illness, to get in a car or a bus and drive for 7 hours to the nearest care center. So if they can instead go see a local provider who may not have deep expertise in, let's say, oncology, who can, through telemedicine, get access to those skills, that's a win-win situation. Let's take a look at the market opportunity. This is just 3 of those categories that I earlier had up. And before we look at the numbers, and which are interesting, they're certainly significant. Combined annual growth rate, very significant. Let's look at the key growth drivers, because I think those are what's really going to push R&D and policy change in this area. We're starting to see more patient-centric government reform, and I think the governments have recognized that bringing the patients in as partners with their healthcare providers offers the potential to lower cost and also provide better outcomes. There's a demand across the board for higher healthcare quality, a rising awareness of self-care. Many nations, of course, are faced with an aging population because of the change in lifestyle in many developing or recently developed countries, we're seeing a rising incidence of chronic diseases. People have access to personal digital solutions through their cell phones, their home computers. And policy-wise, we're also seeing through I'd say the auspices of what's become called the new healthcare economy, we're seeing the burden shifting from insurers to providers. So we're shifting from a model of fee for service, you come see your doctor and it's $65 for an office visit, to physicians actually being compensated in a results-driven sort of way. This slide speaks to some of these trends numerically, and I'm sorry, this is U.S. Centric. Next year, John, when you invite me back, I'll have more of a global perspective on this, I promise. So in the U.S., we're seeing healthcare spending projected to rise an average of about 5.8% a year. It's supposed to grow 1.3% faster than GDP, which I'm not an economist, but that alarms me as a growth rate. Healthcare share of GDP is expected to rise from 17.5% to a little over 20% by 2025. And of course, again, the aging population is anticipated to contribute to faster overall growth. We're in the United States expecting to see federal funding for Medicare and Medicaid to also increase, and because that's funded by the taxpayers, as a taxpayer, that's a concern. So touching on some of the trend points, really what we're seeing is spending is going up. There's enhanced patient involvement. The new healthcare economy is driving a lot of change on the ground and with policy. The next slide will touch briefly on what is becoming chronic in the U.S., which is a shortage of trained healthcare professionals, and then the costs to participate in the system. So we mentioned fragmented care. The more fragmented the care, the less efficient it is, which I think makes fundamental sense. In the U.S., we figure that adds about $4,500 a year in healthcare spending. The electronic medical records, again, as those begin to come together and be integrated and homogeneous, we're expecting to see enhancement in efficiency. I think that's probably worked, that slide, in view of what I said earlier. All that needs to be unpacked. The supply and demand issue in the U.S., I think you see from these numbers that the shortages are expected to increase fairly dramatically between the present day and 2025. And in order to address the issue, there's got to be innovation in delivery. Here comes AI and digital health with the promise of innovation and greater efficiency, greater use of technology in those, and an increase in federal support for our young doctors in their residencies. Also a cost problem. Healthcare premiums for employer-sponsored coverage has increased a whopping 87% since 2000 in the U.S. Obviously, this kind of trajectory can't continue long term. One of the approaches to the cost problem is to engage the patients more deeply in their own care, discuss their healthcare goals with them. Again, digital health and AI provides a promise for this. I think an excellent measure of where the field is going is set up in this slide, which touches on global venture capital in healthcare and digital health. So I'm back out of the US and in the broader world now. We're not finished with 2017, so this data is for 2016. 2016, there were $28 billion in invested capital in the healthcare space. A pretty incredible amount, certainly more than a drop in the bucket. The digital health is continuing to rise in investment. We're seeing in 2017, and innovation continues to thrive. So there's 7,600 digital health AI startups globally. Obviously very significant. 2016 saw $7.9 billion in total venture funding in the global digital health space. $7.9 billion of invested venture capital represents 29% of the total amount invested in global healthcare during that period. Furthermore, the digital health completed deal count of sorry, I'm actually having a little difficulty. It's 585, accounts for 25% of the deals. The one thing I want to really draw out on this slide is this very bottom number here. So in 2016, there were 200 plus new investors that entered the digital health space. That puts the total number of investors to 900. So for those who are here, who are entrepreneurs and are hoping to get funding for their ideas and their new businesses, I think this should leave you with a sense of hope and a promise for the future of the field, and hopefully a promise for the business that you're working with or looking to create. This, I think, is a very interesting fact. Let's just, for this slide, pay attention to the purple horizontal bars. That's all seed funding for digital health companies. As we know, venture capitalists tend to really kind of prefer to come in when things are a little bit further along. This is all very early stage investing. So the purple is seed. The light blue is Series A. It's very early stage. So early stage, 221 of the deals, or about 65% globally, were either seed or Series A. So again, I think for the entrepreneurs in the group in this space, that should be very hopeful. Okay, so we talked a little bit about VC as a source of funding. There's another great source of funding and really entry into the larger world, and that's partnerships with Big Pharma. We've seen some interesting partnerships develop over the last few years. AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and Novartis are continuing to evaluate digital health initiatives across drug discovery, clinical trial management, and medical diagnosis. GSK and Pfizer are collaborating with Apple for use of Apple's research kit in clinical trials. Biogen and Fitbit are partnered up using wearables in clinical trial management. Potentially a great use if you can actually, on the ground, in the real world, follow what's going on with patients as they're participating in a clinical trial. I think that holds great potential for minimizing or at least reducing the number of failures of promising drugs and devices. Teva Pharmaceuticals is partnering with American Well to use its smart inhalers for patients with asthma and COPD. This one, I think, is great. You probably saw this. It was in the general press to a fair amount of acclaim a couple of weeks ago. The tie-up between Proteus and Otsuka for a digital health version of the antipsychotic Abilify to confirm that the patients have actually taken the medication and are compliant. So Proteus actually got FDA approval for the device in July of 2012. They used a non-predicate route through FDA. Nobody had developed a similar device, so they didn't have to show substantial equivalence. Low-risk device. The sensor transmits a signal to a patch that the patient is wearing, confirming that the drug has been taken. The new drug is called MySight, the drug with the sensor, and that was approved by the FDA just this month using the NDA route. There's a suite of devices and applications that come along with MySight. One is a portal that allows access to patient information for the physician and also for the patient, and a smartphone app that allows people who may be caregivers for the patient to actually confirm that the patient has taken the medication. Some of the ethical questions, and this has been out for 2 weeks, and already we're seeing people agonizing a bit about what are the ethical issues. You're sure you're getting enhanced compliance, but are we invading the patient's privacy? Is it too intrusive? One thing I think it's worth considering about this is, okay, this is for a mental disorder, so we'll put that over in one category. Look at the diseases where compliance is really almost a fundamental social responsibility, because if you're not compliant, you become a laboratory for creating resistant species. Now, what if we're doing this for antivirals, for anti-HIV medications, anti-tuberculosis medications, any sort of a communicable infectious disease of the community, and confirming that people are compliant? Okay, so back to our ethical concerns, privacy and intrusiveness, but look at the potential for extending the lifespans of our existing drugs, rather than consigning everything to be thrown off of the truck because it's no longer effective against certain pathogens. Let's talk about some products that have been released onto the market. And as I apologize to you all at the front, I'm into the diagnostic aspect of this. So we'll talk about diagnostics first. There's a lot of promise in devices that, particularly in radiology, that are able to read images. We're seeing reports, a lot of them generated by the companies or the inventors or the investors. So I think you need to take them with a bit of a grain of salt, that machines with AI are actually able, across a number of portions of the body and disease states, to do a better job reading a radiograph than radiologists are. Are there any radiologists in the audience that I'm offending here? I hope not. So one of the reasons behind that is the artificial intelligence devices are able to self-calibrate over time and over a large data set. As the data set becomes larger, in principle, the devices and the algorithms become more accurate. So in the imaging fields, there are a number of deep learning imaging startups. I highlighted iCarbonics because they made the not insignificant news of completing 3 rounds of financing, I believe in 1 year, totaling $214 million. And the one I want to talk about in a little more detail in just a moment is arteries. This goes to the point that the machines, the algorithms are actually better at reading images than humans are. The bar on the left, the vertical bar, is the error rate. So we see conventional computer diagnostics, 14.4% error rate. Deep learning, almost nothing for Alzheimer's. Bone fraction, Again, you see significant improvement on the introduction of deep learning, and in breast cancer, we see also a very significant improvement in the ability of the images to be diagnostic. Arteries has a package called CardioDL, and I think interestingly, CardioDL is the first clinical deep learning application that was approved by FDA, quite recently approved. It monitors heart function by providing measurements of the volume of the left and right ventricle, and it's able to recognize problems with the heart without manual intervention by somebody to read the image. I went through on a 510(k) clearance. It takes a professional human analyst 30 to 60 minutes to read a relevant image or a relevant series of images. In contrast, it takes CardioDL 15 seconds to produce a result. So, incredible increase in efficiency. The algorithm, the deep learning module, was trained on 1,000 cases, and just with that 1,000 cases, if you go back to that neural network architecture that I put up, it was able to derive 10,000 diagnostic rules based on those 1,000 cases. So deep learning is also highly relevant to molecular diagnostics, and this slide just provides some names of some molecular diagnostics startups that are active. There's a deep learning module for molecular diagnostics, PCR AI, and of course, I think as everybody knows, PCR, qPCR is really the nuts and bolts of molecular diagnostics. Approximately 2.5 billion qPCR infection tests are run a year, and that's projected to be growing at about 10 to 15%. The PCR AI is claimed to increase the interpretation accuracy to 99.9%. Which is pretty incredible. And the algorithm was taught on 250,000 studies. It's projected that the incorporation of deep learning modules into molecular diagnostics could lead to a $35 billion a year savings in molecular diagnostics. Okay, as I told you, this was kind of my entree, or one of my entrees to the whole field, which is deep learning in drug discovery. So I'm probably somewhat preaching to the choir here, but the cost of developing a new drug, depending on who you listen to, there was a recent Forbes article that said that it's about $2.5 billion, and it takes close to 12 years. So if you fall out of clinical trials after that resource expenditure, obviously it's potentially and has been catastrophic for companies. The prediction, now I don't know how much of this might be hype. I think we're going to find out in the next probably 3 years or so. But the prediction is that deep learning in drug discovery can amount or can yield as much as a 50% savings in cost, which by 2035 would lead to a savings of over $100 billion for the global healthcare system. Obviously quite significant. Some of the things that deep learning and drug discovery does, again, remember this, bringing together huge amounts of data, integrating the data, breaking down silos, getting everything talking to each other, the disparate pieces of the pharmaceutical drug discovery projects. We're integrating all the data. It's improving collaboration internally and externally. Employing IT-enabled portfolio decision support gives the potential to leverage new discovery technologies. As we saw with Abilify, and we think of with Fitbit and other wearables, we can deploy sensors and detection devices and collect relevant information from those at the clinical trial stage on the patients that are taking the drug. Ideally, this will lead to an increase in clinical trial efficiency, both in the design and the execution stages, improve safety and risk management, and will sharpen focus on real-world evidence, so evidence that's actually, again, coming from the patients who are part of the study. So we look at this as both the front end and the back end in drug discovery. So the front end might be you're faced with a library of 15 million small molecule potential lead candidates. How do you decide which of those leads you're going to pick to enter into clinical trial? The back end is clinical trial, and you can use this to identify the patients to enroll in the clinical trial based on more sources. So genomics, proteomics, all the multi-omics universe, and figure out who the drug is going to be the most appropriate for, and how you can maximize the chances of your success in a clinical trial for a relevant population. Ideally, that'll lead to trials that are shorter, less expensive, and more powerful. Some deep learning drug discovery startups. I'll just call out Atomwise, which is a San Francisco-based startup, which we represent out of our San Francisco office. Some very interesting technology. So all of these things are great, but if you can't get them to market other than as something intriguing academically, what good are they? So let's just briefly look at the regulatory structure and some of the potential hurdles for digital health and AI products. Again, I'm out of the broader world and back in the United States again. So AI is in fact regulated. It's regulated by the FDA. It's regulated by the FTC. And the individual states also have a regulatory role in AI and digital health. So the FDA regulates it because it has the authority to regulate software and other technologies that meet the definition of a device. And as you see from the first sub-bullet there, an incredibly broad definition of what a device is. Where the rubber really hits the road with the FDA is in this second bullet, intended for use. Intended for use is the all-important phrase for diagnosis of a disease or other conditions, or in treatment or prevention. Then it's exclusive of anything that's chemical or being metabolized by man. So the authority to regulate by the FDA comes from the clause intended use. But the owner of the product seeking license to market actually has an incredible amount of power in the process, because your product is what you say it is. You tell FDA what your intended use is. You tell the broader world what your intended use is. And that can be by virtue of claims on product labels, it be advertising or promotional material. It can be oral or written statements by sales reps. This is often highly problematic. And by press releases. Sometimes the sales reps go off and say things that simply are not true, and it causes problems for the company down the road. FDA regulation has a number of software-specific exemptions that AI and digital health fall into. So administrative support functions, fairly low level, running hospital offices, running doctor's offices, maintaining and encouraging a healthy lifestyle. So a program that teaches you how to go out and jog, a calorie counter, something that teaches mindfulness or relaxation to minimize stress. None of those are regulated by FDA. Those all fall within the exception of the general wellness policy and are considered to be low risk. One of the last slides, I'll show you where the wheels kind of came off on that and the states got involved. To serve as electronic health records for transferring, storing, and converting formats or displaying medical device data or results. Those are all exempted. The recently passed 21st Century Cure Act, 21st Century Cures Act, also exempts for clinical decision support. So we think in terms of the arteries example that I gave earlier. That device is a clinical decision support device, and a clinician is looking at the output from that in making a diagnosis and a treatment recommendation. I can't look at the digital yield from an arteries device and then tell somebody here that they have a heart problem or to take this medication. That does not fall within the exemption. Probably a bad example is it raises another series of problems practicing medicine without a license. But as long as the clinician is reviewing the output of the device, the software-specific exemption applies. Mobile medical apps, there's a separate exemption for that. What do we mean by mobile medical apps? These are things that may display patient data. Those are considered class 1, low-risk devices. Control of a medical device. So a physician or a nurse being able to control a medical device remotely. Those devices are regulated in the same way that the medical device that they're controlling is regulated. Most likely class 2 in FDA, so even those remote devices, even if it's your cell phone, it's going to be regulated as class 2. Creating alarms, recommendations, or new data that's related to a medical device. Again, that's going to be regulated as though it were the medical device itself. So that's that first category FDA intends to regulate as medical devices. And there are certain devices that FDA will exercise its discretion. It may regulate them, it may not regulate them, and that's very device specific. And then there's those that they decline to regulate, like your mindfulness or your relaxation device. So how do we figure out whether a device is regulated, and what do you do if your AI device is regulated? So class 1, as I mentioned, and this is FDA's example. Dental floss would be considered class 1. A condom is considered class 2. A replacement heart valve is considered class 3. So class 1, they apply general controls, and the general controls are quite broad and really not at all unexpected. They can't be banned devices. There has to be appropriate labeling. Good manufacturing practices have to be used in manufacturing the device. Class 2 are considered moderate risk devices. They'll have general controls, but then they also have special controls, which are device specific, and you would need to file a 510K pre-market notification with FDA. Class 3, replacement heart valves, high risk, general controls, and you need to file pre-market approval application or a de novo classification request. So speaking in some of the general requirements. You have pre-market obligations and post-market obligations, and this just kind of reprises what I just said on those general obligations. Classifying a device, the FDA has a helpful website that you can go through a matrix of different devices and figure out how to classify your device. The owner, manufacturer of the device is responsible for compliance. Manufacturer can mean more than just making the device. It can include packaging the device, repackaging the device, or its initial importation or the initiation of the device specifications. So the FDA regulates the final finished device and not the components that go into the device. It's just a quick sort of workflow for determining whether your product is regulated and how it's been regulated. This is just, again, kind of restates what we've just discussed. Some examples. Promotion of machine learning software for medical product research and development, that's going to be unregulated. Promotion of software for general purpose electronic health record functions, also unregulated. Machine learning software for use in analyzing billing data, unregulated. Software for transmission and display of medical device data or radiological images, unregulated, but the FDA has enforcement discretion on that. Predictive analytics software for use in analyzing data to predict which patients are at risk for certain medical events, potentially regulated as a device. Machine learning software for use in analyzing medical images to provide diagnosis or treatment recommendations, regulated device. So it's not just FDA that has regulatory authority. The Federal Trade Commission in the US also has regulatory authority. There were 3 recent cases in which FTC decided to act against companies that were software providers, consumer software providers in the healthcare space. They were Cardio, Runtastic, and Mattis. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So it was a complaint against Focus Education, which seemed to be making a claim that it helped with children's ADHD. That was problematic, and they ended up settling with the FTC and pulling those claims, and there was a monetary settlement as well. MELAP and Mole Detective, different field, but same sort of filing by the FTC. These were analyses of moles and blemishes on patients' skin using their own smartphone. So essentially making a cancer diagnosis using your smartphone, obviously problematic. Luminosity, who we're probably all more familiar with than Focus Education, and these melanoma detection companies, they have the ads that come up that can increase your brain power and your mental acuity by running through their exercises. But they ran afoul of the FTC by claiming that using their software could reduce ADHD and post-traumatic stress disorder. You kind of have to wonder how that got out of the shop. Why would anybody in their right mind try to make a claim like that? So the 3 that I was mentioning, there's Runtastic, there's Cardio, and there's Mattis. And this is where the state came in. So these were actions by the New York State Attorney General. 3 healthcare related apps, Cardio and Runtastic, were actually not even in the FDA regulated field, but they were making claims that slipped the device into state regulation that prohibited these types of claims being made. Cardio claimed to turn your phone into a digital stethoscope and would draw certain conclusions based on what your heart was doing as it measured your heart. Runtastic made weight loss and other health claims, but had done no studies comparing people who had used the app with people who didn't use the app. I think the one that is really kind of disturbing was Mattis, which is an infant heart monitor. And Mattis was actually telling purchasers that they should use their device rather than Doppler or infant or fetal heart monitors because it was more accurate. So the New York Attorney General shut that down. They had to pay $30,000 in penalties, which was really mild because once the state gets in, these things can be, I think, on average $16,000 per violation. So depending on how many of these devices you've sold, you can see that that adds up to significant money very quickly. And again, I'd like to thank you all for putting up with me for almost 55 minutes. Thank you again to the NUS Duke-NUS group for bringing us in, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.